Hey, what's going on everyone? And after a 6-month break, today we are going to be going back to our older season episode breakdowns of Overlord. I've really wanted to focus on the Holy Kingdom stuff because it's so relevant to right now. You know, it's just the newest thing in Overlord that was released. So I've been prioritizing that along with a couple other side projects that I wanted to get out. But now that we got all that out of the way and we're kind of getting to the end of the Holy Kingdom cut content, I think it was a good time to start this back up. And today we are going to be covering the first episode of season 2 and the first episode covering the volume 4 content, which is the Lizardman Heroes arc. I gotta tell you, I love the cover on this book. The cover art is so good. I mean, it looks like a real war here, and that's exactly what we're getting into. You know, the cover really shows you what the dynamic of this volume is going to be. Now, as far as the anime is concerned, I've heard a lot of mixed feelings about this arc of the show. Whenever a discussion about the worst arc in Overlord comes up, a lot of people usually throw the Lizardman Heroes in the running. And the main argument I hear about the Lizardman Heroes arc being the worst arc of Overlord is that a lot of people apparently view it as filler. If you took the Lizardman Heroes arc out of the story, not that much would change. And I have to be honest, I don't really disagree with that opinion. There's some small things referenced about the Lizardmen here and there. Zaryusu and Shasuryu are teaching Hamski martial arts, and Zenbaru, one of the Lizardmen we meet in this arc, he's the one who leads Ainz to the Dwarven Kingdom in Volume 11. Those roles could have been taken up by other people. There's no real major, huge ramifications that persist in the later volumes from this arc. However, I disagree on that being a negative. The thing I really like about the Lizardman Heroes arc is this is the first arc of the story that is almost entirely from the perspective of the New World inhabitant. We're really seeing the effect of Nazereck, and this arc sets the standard for a lot of the other arcs that do this. We see this in the Magic Caster of Destroy arc with Jerkneef's point of view, and also with the Holy Kingdom movie. I feel like this arc kind of set the precedent for how the anime adapted the Holy Kingdom movie, which is like 90% from Nea's point of view as the New World native. And like I said, I feel like this is the first arc where we're really seeing the major ramifications that Nazereck is having on societies of the New World. And it's one of the big themes of Overlord. The world is changing because of Ainz's presence in the New World. And that's like one of the coolest things about Overlord, is seeing how the world reacts to his presence. He's not just like coasting like a lot of isekais do. His presence is disrupting the entire world, and the world is reacting to it. And this is an arc that focuses on that type of stuff. So I disagree on it being filler because it's hitting such a major theme of Overlord. Even if this arc itself doesn't have major ramifications for later plot points, it's still important for that reason. So that's why I like this arc. I have to say though, this first episode is one of the most confusingly adapted episodes when you're like comparing it to the light novel. What they show us is completely out of order to how it's presented in the light novels. So starting off, the first scene of the episode is between the Captain of the Black Scripture and Zeshi, who are both Slane Theocracy people. I've mentioned both of them many times in previous videos. The first scene in the light novel is not this scene. This is actually the intermission chapter that takes place like in the middle of Volume 4. A lot of what happens in Volume 4 is it keeps jumping back and forth between, like, there's usually a long period of time where it focuses on the Lizardmen, and then there's usually a small insert that's away from the Lizardmen talking about someone else, or it's from the perspective of someone else. It's almost like there's small intermissions like sprinkled throughout the entire volume. What they did in the anime was basically take all these intermissions and just put them in the first episode, like just back to back to back. I think that works better for the anime in certain ways because it does kind of seem like a hard stop to the story, and they have to like jump away to something that seems almost unrelated. I think it flows a little better in the anime, but it does change the context for certain things. But this scene with the Slane Theocracy, this is fine. I think putting it at the beginning, I don't really see any sort of issue with that. Something that's explained to us in the light novel that isn't explained to to us in the anime, these two people are godkins. And godkins is a term used by the Slane Theocracy to describe people who have the blood of players. The Slane Theocracy worships the 6 great gods who are all players. So they view just players in general as deities. So anyone that has the blood of those players are basically demigods. And so the Captain of the Black Scripture and Zeshi are both people that fall under that category. The main things that are omitted is we get a little more information on the Captain of the Black Scripture, who this scene is from his point of view. We also learned a little bit more about the Slane Theocracy's culture and how the Captain of the Black Scripture, because he's a godkin, they're trying to convince him to get married, like so he can produce children because they want his bloodline to continue. And actually, because he's a godkin, normally polygamy isn't allowed in the Slane Theocracy, but because he's a godkin, they actually allow it for him. And the captain is like not really into the whole idea, like he doesn't really want to get married. And Zeshi makes a comment on, oh, you're just you're still a little kid. And we learned that the captain is actually younger than 20 years old, which is like considered an adult in the Slane Theocracy. And it also reveals to us that Zeshi, she looks like a little girl, but she's actually much older because of her elven heritage. They don't really make a mention of Zeshi being a half-elf in the anime, but it's noted by the captain that Zeshi intentionally covers her ears because she doesn't like her elven heritage. Another point to focus on is that Zeshi is playing with a Rubik's Cube, and Zeshi and the captain talk about how it was something left behind by the 6 great gods as like an intelligence test. That was a subtle way for us as the readers to deduce that the 6 great gods were from Earth and they came from Yggdrasil. So, and that's really the first time I think any other players are like directly mentioned in the story, which of course is very, very important. Also, Zeshi asked the captain who would win in a fight, me or the vampire you encounter, since they had that little scuffle in volume 3. And in the anime, he says, Zeshi, you would win. And he says that in the light novel too. But in the light novel, we get his reasoning, and his reasoning is because when he fought Shalltear, it really wasn't much of a fight, it was more of just a clash. When he clashed with Shalltear, she wasn't wearing any of her gear. And so because of that, he thinks that Zeshi would win because Zeshi has all these armaments and, the gear left behind by the 6 great god that she wears. Shalltear's a monster, she doesn't have any gear, so Zeshi would win because she has gear on. We do not see these people for so long in the story, so like this is anything you can get from these characters, especially just anyone in the Slane Theocracy. We don't really see anyone from the Slane Theocracy barely at all throughout the rest of the volumes until we get to volume 15. We briefly see some Slane Theocracy people like scattered throughout a few different volumes, but like they're just so rare that getting anything from them is a pretty big deal. So then the next scene after this actually isn't in this volume at all. The scene between Platinum Dragonlord and Regrit is actually the intermission of volume 7. Volume 7 is actually completely out of order how it was displayed in season 3. That's going to be a big thing to talk about once I get to season 3. But yeah, the intermission for volume 7 was actually put in the arc of the show that covers volume 4. So it was moved up 3 volumes. This is the scene where the context for the scene is completely different in the show than it is in the light novel. Platinum Dragonlord and Regrit talk about Evil Eye, and they mention Evil Eye as well as the Blue Roses. And in the light novel, by this point, you had already met Evil Eye. All the events in the Men of the Kingdom arc had already occurred. So we're well acquainted with Evil Eye and the Blue Roses at this point. We've seen them for a whole arc here. But in the anime, when Regrit talks about, oh, I had my friends help me like fight Evil Eye, and she's a tough cookie and everything like that, we don't know what the hell she's talking about. So the context for this conversation is just totally different in the light novel. The only thing I want to comment on between the scene between PDL and Regrit is a few factoids that we miss out in the anime. So one of the bigger pieces of information we find out is that Regrit's ring, which she gave to Gazef, we see that transition at the end of this scene. Platinum Dragonlord confirms that ring is made with wild magic, and that's actually the first item to be confirmed to be made by wild magic in the show. Also, when Platinum Dragonlord brings up talking about how there has been the power has descended again, and Regrit's like, oh, it's an aftershock like the last one. And when Regrit asks Platinum Dragonlord, like, are you sure it's evil? In the book, she mentioned it could be like our leader was. And so that confirms that the leader of the 13 heroes was a player. And they talk about the leader and they say like, oh, he died too young. And like Platinum Dragonlord mentions that like the leader killed another player that was with them, and he refused to be resurrected. We confirmed that there were 2 players in the 13 heroes. They also talk about other Dragon Lords, like Regrit asks PDL, like, would any of the other Dragon Lords come help us out? And Platinum Dragon Lord says that's pretty unlikely. He says the only ones that are still around are the ones who didn't fight against the 8 Greed Kings. So the 8 Greed Kings are also mentioned as well. Another big group of players, some more player knowledge here that isn't in the anime. They also mention in the light novel why PDL is where he is, because he mentions in the conversation that he can't leave. Like, the reason he travels around in the armor body and does that stuff is because he doesn't want to leave where he's at. And I've mentioned this before, but Platinum Dragon Lord is inside Yuanshu, which was the capital of the 8 Greed Kings, and he's actually guarding a sword that was left behind by the 8 Greed Kings because he wants to make sure no one gets it. I believe this weapon was a guild weapon of the 8 Greed Kings, and he's making sure no one gets it by staying in the castle, because he mentions guild weapons and things that can rival guild weapons, and he refers to the sword. I think another big takeaway of this conversation is just letting the audience know that there are people in the new world that know about Yggdrasil and players, and they know about, like, the terminology and stuff. Like, Regrit and PDL are 2 of the people that know about this stuff, which I think is really important lore-wise. So yeah, the big tidbits that are left out are just more player information. We get so little of that in the series that any omission of that is something I would make a note of. So the next scene is actually an intermission chapter from another volume, and it's the intermission chapter from volume 3. In one of my season 1 breakdowns, I actually already covered the intermission of volume 3. So that scene I actually have already explained already, so we're gonna skip over that one. But just know that that scene is not in this arc of the story in the light novel. It's a completely different thing. So then the next scene in the anime is the scene where Momon and Nabe are fighting this basilisk that is brought to them by Hamsky. And Ainz quickly defeats it and then teleports back to Nazereck. And then he meets shortly with Mare, and then he teleports and then meets with Albedo. The first scene of volume 4 is him opening the door and talking to Albedo. So all those entry scenes, I don't know where those came from. They might have been anime only. There was no lead up to him just walking into that room with Albedo. It's like the first page is him meeting Albedo. So there's nothing before that. So I don't know where that extra stuff came from. And then we have that funny interaction between Ainz and Albedo. The only thing I want to point out here in the light novel that is focused on in the light novel is that Ainz basically realizes, like, he doesn't have any physical desires, and we get a little bit more about how his mentality has changed. The only reason he even entertained, like, Albedo's little roleplay thing is because he was interested in, like, how she would react. He even makes a funny joke like, oh, I don't think I should take a swing if I don't have a bat. But I think the main thing to take away from this scene is just Ainz is starting to realize how different his mindset is. Like, this has kind of been a slow acceptance for him, but he's really starting to come around on the fact that he's not human anymore, and he's adjusting to that. So a small scene that's omitted from the anime is Ainz gives Albedo all the money that he's earned as an adventurer in order to conduct experiments with. He wants to figure out if the New World money can be exchanged for Yggdrasil money or vice versa, because that would determine, like, if Yggdrasil money can't be replicated, then we need to be very, very careful with how we use it, and so on and so forth. And then we get a big scene where he explains the map. And the map that he shows in this volume, I believe, is the map that we get in volume 9 much later. And it's noted by Albedo that she's like, that's all? And, like, that kind of goes to show you the map we get, like, of this world, it's not really complete. We don't have a lot of knowledge as far as the map is concerned. Like a lot of the stuff is mentioned, but it's not detailed, because, like, writing maps in the, a medieval world is, like, a very difficult thing. And apparently in the light novel, it's explained by Ainz that even getting his hands on this map was almost impossible, because maps are super valuable. And then he goes into this long explanation about the geography of what's known on the map. I actually have a whole video detailing the New World map if you guys would like to check that out. So I'm going to skip over explaining that during this video, but just know there's a lot more that's explained in the light novel than is explained in the anime. We also get a note by Ainz that he's very weary of Yuanshu because he knows that it's related to players. Like, he's heard the stories about it, and so he already knows that there have been players in this world. So in the anime, we get several scenes where basically he talks about, like, Aura, and then it cuts away to a scene with Aura, and then he talks about Shalltear, and then it cuts away to a scene with Shalltear. That doesn't happen in the light novel. This scene completes uninterrupted, and then later on in the volume, like after long scenes with Zaryusu and the Lizardmen, it's just kind of a little aside where it just jumps away and it's from Aura's point of view and she's doing the fake Nazereck project. The scene with Aura, I don't really have anything to comment on about. It was a very small scene just showing, what's going on with her and her project for building the fake Nazereck in the Great Forest of Tobe. We do get some ramifications of that later on in the Two Leaders arc, but we'll see more of that later. The only thing I should comment on is this whole scene basically focuses on Aura taking a break and having a meal, but actually Aura doesn't actually need to eat because she has a ring of sustenance is what they called it. And most of the Nazereck people don't need to eat or ingest things at all because they either their physiology doesn't require food or they have those rings on. I do want to comment on the 9th floor scene with Shalltear because this actually directly relates to a video I released recently, The World of 2138 Explained. So it turns out the 9th floor has all these shops on it. It has a nail salon and a flower shop, and then it has the bar, of course, and it's actually one of a few bars. There's several bars on the 9th floor, and apparently this was designed by the members of Ainz and Albedo to apparently mimic an arcology. And I explained what arcologies are in my World of 2138 video and how that society kind of worked. But arcologies are basically contained super environments, and so they kind of designed it to mimic that structure with all the shops and things that are on the 9th floor. It's supposed to mimic that apparently. And this scene is from the bartender's perspective, and so it's funny because in the anime he just seems super stoic. In the light novel he's actually in his mind complaining about Shalltear. He's like, gosh, would she get out of here already? And she's moping around and she's clearly waiting for him to ask her about what the problem is or why she's drinking this much. And so he does. He asks her, he's like, do you want to talk about what's wrong? And she goes I don't want to talk about it. And in his mind, he goes, for fuck's sake. I just thought that was funny because there's barely any lines like that in the story. So I just thought that was funny that we just get a line just him going, for fuck's sake, man. Apparently Demiurge likes to chill out in that bar, which I just thought that was a cool little funny tidbit. Him and Cocytus last week were chilling in there and having a drink together, which I just think is absolutely hilarious because on the one hand, we have Demiurge literally running camps where he's skinning people alive for paper. And then we have Demiurge just chilling in a bar having a drink with Cocytus. But picturing that, I wish we got a scene like that. That would be awesome. There's also a little tidbit mentioned in this scene in the light novel where Claire comes in and the bartender serves them both apple juice. The bartender comments that the apples were planted on the 6th level, and they're like, oh, we have Nazereck apples? And apparently this was a test conducted by Ainz because he brought in a dryad from outside Nazereck to manage an orchard. And that event where he brought in the dryad actually comes from bonus content that was sold with volume 4. I could make a whole video talking about what went down in that volume, and actually maybe I should. The gist of it is, in the Great Forest of Tobe, there was this dryad that requested Ainz's help with defeating this evil treant, and as thanks for that, she now serves Ainz and works in Nazereck, and so Ainz is conducting this experiment about, oh, can I grow plants in Nazereck? Just a small little tidbit, but it's also showing you that Tuare isn't the first outsider to come into Nazereck. That has already happened. So after all these introductory scenes just kind of going all over the place, we finally get the lead into the actual true focus of this arc, which is on the Lizardmen and the war that Nazereck is going to be having with the Lizardmen. It's funny because in the anime, we just cut to a scene where Cocytus talks with him in the throne room about how I am very excited to go to war, to lead Nazereck's first war in this world. And they don't really explain that they're going to war against the Lizardmen. They don't really say that verbatim. That scene with him actually in the throne room with Cocytus doesn't happen in this part of the light novel. In the anime, it's almost kind of a little mysterious as to what exactly is going on because it didn't verbatim say we are going to war with the Lizardmen like it did in the light novel. It's kind of similar to certain events in the Holy Kingdom movie in that way because it's if you hadn't read the light novel and you're only watching the anime, you haven't gotten these verbatim statements that that's telling you exactly what's going on, so you kind of have to fill in the gaps yourself, which I think is interesting and makes for like an alternate way to digest the story. So then we have the last scene of the episode, which is the first scene with the Lizardmen. In the anime, it's very quick, like it's just like introducing you to Zaryusu, Shasuryu. I'm having a hard time saying his name really fast. In the light novel, it's a much more detailed explanation. It gives you like the total anatomy of Lizardmen and how like, oh, they've evolved to have like webbed feet and like it hurts to walk on land, but some of them are okay with it. It also explains their society a little bit more and like how they actually have like a caste system in their society where it's like the chief, and then like there's the warrior caste, and then there's the elders. And this is mentioned in the anime too, how Zaryusu actually doesn't fit into the caste system because he's what they call a traveler. And the travelers are branded with that mark that Zaryusu has, because Lizardmen tend to never leave where they're born. They tend to just stay in their society for their whole lives. So when they go out into the world, you know, they're leaving the society of Lizardmen, and that's why they're marked as being different. I think this scene is also good because it really quickly shows you the relationship between the two brothers. It also establishes kind of Zaryusu's thoughts about how he doesn't really feel like he's a little insecure about his place in the tribe, like because most of them apparently Lizardmen that travel don't come home, but some of them do. And Zaryusu's a little insecure about like where he belongs exactly. Like, you know, was it right for me to come back? Like I don't really fit in. Him and Shasuryu talk about marriage and how like Zaryusu should get married soon, but he's like I don't really think like that's for me right now. And like he's a little insecure about himself and his position in the tribe, even though he's the chief's brother. And then we have the appearance of the I don't even know what those monsters are called. I don't even know what to call them. The appearance of the monsters declaring that the Great One will attack you in 8 days. It's the beginning of the war. And that sums up the first episode of season 2. This one really just was so confusing to talk about because it just pulls from so many different sources, and we're literally covering things in 3 different volumes in this episode. And not only that, we're like pulling chunks from like over the first half of volume 4 and just putting them in this episode. They really wanted to get all the cutaways that are in the light novel out of the way so that they could tell the rest of the Lizardman story uninterrupted, which I think works for the anime. I'm not wholly against it. The only thing I think was maybe the questionable decision was inserting the scene with Regrit and PDL here, although it does reference events that happened in volume 3 with PDL and Shallowtear's very brief confrontation, so it does have some defense for being in this episode. The biggest change I would say is just inserting the intermission from volume 7 in this episode, because the context of that conversation is just completely different, because you hadn't met Blue Roses yet, whereas in the light novel by this point we have had 2 whole volumes with Blue Roses in them, so like we're very well familiar with who Regrit is talking about. So next time hopefully it's going to be a lot simpler of a breakdown, because it's just going to be one continuous story until the end of this arc. So guys, what did you think of this first episode breakdown for season 2? Leave your thoughts in the comments section. You know I love to hear from you guys. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see another one like it, please hit that like button to let me know. And if you aren't already, please subscribe to the channel. It does help me out more than you know, and it'll let you know when I post in the future. With that being said, I want to thank you all for watching to the very end of the video, and I will see you all next time. Bye.